licensed Texas irrigator, certified irrigation contractor, and certified landscape irrigation auditor. And she was one of the first irrigation professionals in Texas to earn the EPA WaterSense partner rating and has worked in the green industry for over 20 years. Amanda's delivered delivered irrigation and water conservation training for 20 years to homeowners, HOA boards, landscape designers, and licensed irrigators. And she spends her free time paddling the Nueces River, advocating for wild space preservation, and volunteering for her local Keep Texas Beautiful chapter in Real County. So please join me in welcoming Amanda.
Good morning. How are y'all doing? Great. I am happy to be here and happy to be talking to a group of converts already about the intricacies of irrigation. Now, I know that in this part of the world, a lot of people get by without irrigation, but also a lot of people move to this area not realizing that the path of no irrigation is a path that they can seek. So if you're one of those people, or you moved into a house with a traditional landscape and you're wanting to transition to the native landscapes that we've been talking about all day, having your irrigation system in place can be a good way to help you through that transition. And if you're a person who doesn't yet have the time or the money to transition to a native landscape and you need to keep a traditional landscape alive, then having more knowledge about how to do that in the smartest way possible with your existing irrigation system is what I'm here to talk to you about today. So a little bit about me. I am license number 10,969. I got my irrigation license in 2003. Now I think they're up to almost the 30,000 licenses. So when I first got my license, I was a newbie and a young'un, but now as more and more licenses have been issued, I'm fast becoming an old folk in the industry. So I am a certified irrigation contractor and certified landscape irrigation auditor with the International Irrigation Association. My husband and I were, I believe, the first two applicants in Texas to earn our EPA WaterSense partner rating. And that was years and years ago when they first started the WaterSense partner rating for licensed irrigators. I am a former certified teacher. I taught middle school for 4 years. That's why no audience ever frightens me. I can present anywhere because when you've looked out on faces of unimpressed 7th and 8th graders, you can present in front of anyone after that point. So I do love teaching. I've always loved teaching. My mother was a teacher. Even when I left public school, I continued to teach. And teaching about irrigation is one of my very favorite parts of my job. So I'm really happy to be here today. I did plan a 45-minute presentation, and I see that I've got 35 minutes, so I'm going to talk 30% faster. That's okay. I spent a few years as executive director of our Texas Turf Irrigation Association. They have since changed their name to Texas Irrigation Association. But I learned a lot about the process of licensing and irrigation in Texas. And I'm really glad I've moved on from that because my personal journey has shifted to one of wanting to build an environment that doesn't need as much irrigation. But unfortunately, in traditional development methodologies, they come in, they put a cheap old irrigation system in, which they charge you top dollar for, by the way, and then they put in that ho-hum builder landscape, and then everybody moves here and expects that that's what they're expected to keep alive. So I'm glad to be in a position where I have a little more freedom to really speak my heart about irrigation and what it should be used for. Okay, so today we're going to talk about irrigating a Waterwise landscape. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the basics of irrigation. What I found 20 years ago when I started talking to people about irrigation. Now, mind you, this was before the drought of 2006 and before the drought of 2011. And I didn't even use the word conservation back then because it was a trigger word in the general vernacular. So I used a lot of the word efficiency. And today we're going to talk a lot about irrigation efficiency because that's a big piece of your conservation journey. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about irrigation. I'm gonna release you of any guilt that you might have for starting a grow-in program on your new landscape, especially if you're pursuing native and adaptive plants. And then all along the way, I'm gonna talk to you about options that you can do to your sprinkler system to make it more water conscious. Okay, water-wise irrigation. So knowing about efficiency measures in your sprinkler system is half the battle, but I've added this recently that talking about them is the other half of the battle. I follow a climate scientist named Catherine Hayhoe. She is a Christian. She's based out of Texas Tech University, and she recently became the chief scientist for National Nature Conservancy. Yes, and her most recent book said the most important thing that you can do for climate change is have a conversation with someone about it. So I have adopted that mantra and applied it to what I do every day, which is talk about irrigation and smart irrigation. So I'm giving you that directive today. Learn about smart irrigation and then talk to others about it, because we have just scads of people moving to this area who really have no contextual understanding of how things really work in Texas and how things work in the Hill Country and how things should be moving towards in order to preserve our water resources. So it may feel like a broken record to you. I feel like I say the same words coming out of my mouth every day for 20 years, but whoever you're talking to, it could be new information. So knowing about it is half the battle, and talking about it is the other half. We're going to talk a little bit about the differences between conservation, efficiency, and curtailment. You know, curtailment is the government telling you you can't water, right? But when people hear the word conservation, particularly before the water intelligence efforts that came out of the droughts of 2006 and 2011, back then, when I would use the word conservation, people would think about curtailment. And I would talk about conserving water, and they would think about, oh, well, those are going to be rules that apply to me that are going to force my hand and make me do things that I don't want to do. But really, conservation is your choice and your option, and a lot of things you're probably already doing are supporting a conservation effort. Efficiency is a word that we're going to talk about as it directly relates to irrigation. So let's jump right in. So uniformity is a metric that we use to figure out how well designed and well laid out your irrigation system is. We can do that with a fancy scientific test with catch cans and run your system for a designated amount of time. We can calculate how many gallons per minute you're using. We can calculate which areas of your lawn have good coverage and which areas are lacking, where you may need to rearrange heads. And that's a really important metric that we can use to determine how efficient and uniform your system is running. If you have a high distribution uniformity, that means the water that's coming out of your system has a higher likelihood of getting where it needs to go because of the way it's laid out, because of the nozzles you're using, because of the choices that you've made in your system. You can also find out a really close approximation of how high your uniformity is by turning on your sprinkler zone and walking around in your yard. If your feet are getting wet, water's hitting that spot. And if your feet are not getting wet, then water's not hitting that spot. This is, again, not rocket science. And your plants already know and are probably telling you where your coverage is lacking. So paying a little attention to your landscape can go a long way in getting the non-scientific version of the scientific metric that we use to measure irrigation uniformity. Efficiency is how you're utilizing your system to get the job done with the least amount of gallons used, okay? You can have a super uniform system. Your DU can be 70, 80%, but if you're just setting that runtime in March for what you need in August, and then forgetting about it and not running your changing your schedule and not taking a look at your system, not judging how your plants are doing on the watering schedule that you're using, you're not any more efficient than the guy next door that's got the wrong nozzles and not enough heads and a really low DU. So they're similar, but you have to have both, and efficiency has a lot more to do with your behaviors than uniformity. Uniformity is really a metric of what your system can do. Efficiency is what you can do with your system. So you can have a really uniform system and not be efficient. Likewise, you can have a system that's really not that great DU, but because of the things that you're doing to help it along and monitor it, you can have a more efficient performance from a less uniform system. When you have both, then you really get maximum savings. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so I want to talk to you about a typical irrigation system. It's so much fun to talk about plants and lay out garden design and look at the beautiful drawings and go out and walk around in your yard. Irrigation systems aren't nearly so sexy. They're under the ground. You hardly ever see them or notice them until there's a problem. And so I just made this simple little diagram to kind of show you what's going on underground in your typical irrigation system. So you can see our house there, our little house icon. If you're on a system that's on a city source, you typically will have a backflow device. That's that green box there. That's the device that keeps water from your system from going back into the city main system. Anytime you hear on the news, citizens of so-and-so town are asked to boil their water, that is because a backflow event has occurred and a potential contamination event has occurred in the city mains. So backflow prevention devices are an important part of your irrigation system, and odds are you have one if you are in the city limits or even in a ETJ where you've had to get your system installed with a permit. The solid pipes, the solid lines coming out of your backflow device are main line. And then you can see I've got a little valve icon all throughout that backyard, and the dotted lines coming from the valve going downstream following the arrows are your lateral lines. So having just a little bit of vocabulary under your belt when you call and talk to an irrigation professional can save you a lot of money and save a lot of time on some troubleshooting. For example, if you have a break in your dotted line, that's a lateral leak. When that valve comes on to water that part of your yard, water's going to leak out of that leak. But when that zone turns off and it moves to another zone, it's not going to leak anymore, because water's not coming out of your valve. Alternatively, if you have a leak in your solid lines on my little map here, that's a mainline leak. And if you don't have a master valve on your system, that is your water bill killer. It's just going to run and run and run. When every zone is on, it's going to run. When everything's shut off, it's going to run. So we're going to talk about master valves here in just a little while. If your system was installed since 2009, you have a master valve on your system. Correction, you should have a master valve on your system. Texas state law required it after 2009. So we've got our valves there. We're going to move on to the electrical part of an irrigation system. A lot of people don't realize how important electricity is in your irrigation system. You think irrigation, okay, it's pipes, it's water, it's going to my plants, big whoop, but electricity is a big part of your system and a big part of problems that can cause problems in your system. Every valve that we saw in my last diagram has a wire attached to it, 2 wires in fact, and those wires go back to your irrigation controller that's probably in your garage, that scary gray box that you're afraid to touch. We're going to talk about that in a minute as well. So we've got our controller in our garage, and there's a wire going from that controller to every single valve in your yard. Now you hope that you get a pretty little as-built design when you buy your house that tells you exactly where everything is, but that is a dream and a half. Most of the time you get an as-built that might kind of show you where your valves are. You very rarely get a wire path. So it's really easy to break these when you're doing things like putting in a new flower bed or a dog watch fence or a fence of any kind. Any kind of digging in your yard can cause damage to your wires. There's also a common wire. That dotted line there is our common wire. That goes to every valve in your system. And I tell you this because if you have a problem in your irrigation system and one valve just won't come on, you've probably it's possible you have a cut wire. But if you have a problem with your system and no zones come on, then you probably have a cut common wire. So that's an easy way to kind of self-diagnose when you're having a problem in your irrigation system and recognize that you do have electricity running to each one of those valves. Now there's other problems that can make a valve not work, a diaphragm problem or a solenoid problem, but one of the most common problems that we see, especially in yards of master gardeners, they like to do their own digging. So we see a lot of broken wires. So if you do digging and you find a wire, it's great to stick a flag there and call in for backup if you're not used to making those kinds of repairs yourself. And I put it 3 times on this slide. Wires can get cut during planting or construction. So I can't tell you how many times I've had someone call and go, well, we just got a new pool and now nothing works on the left-hand side of my house. Well, it's buried deep beneath the deep end, those wire cuts, and we have to come up with a whole new solution. So emitters is just where the water comes out. Okay, there's a lot of options for water savings with your emitters. First of all, if you have your original emitters from when your system was put in, unless it was put in the last 3 to 5 years, you will probably save water by upgrading your emitters. Now I say that because emitters just year over year, the technology improves, and I would always recommend to people to retrofit their irrigation heads with pressure regulated heads with a check valve. This is a very sloped, hilly area, and check valves are going to eliminate those those wet spots at the bottom of the hill, because when that zone shuts off, all the water that's in that lateral line is going to follow the path of least resistance. So I recommend PRS heads, pressure regulated heads with check valves installed. Now, here's a little hint. A little tip for you. If you have a licensed irrigator, just an average Joe, come out and make repairs to your house, he may not have PRS CV heads on his truck. You may need to request them. So that's a good vocabulary word for you to take today. If you have work done on your system, or if you're going to retrofit your system, look for PRS CV heads, because those are the ones that you want to use. They have a lot of efficient nozzles or precisely watering nozzles these days. And another point is, if your nozzles are 5 years old or older, you probably have a more efficient nozzle available to you on the market now. We have low angle nozzles. Rainbird has a U nozzle that waters close to the head as well as far away from the head, which can improve your uniformity coming from that head. And then micro emitters and drip are another great option for your garden. We're going to talk a little bit more about drip in just a few minutes. Drip gets a bad rap sometimes. So here's some example of the different types of emitters that you may see in your sprinkler system. This upper right-hand corner is a spray head. That sprays a set pattern all the time. That head is going to pop up and spray a half circle. And it's going to do it for the whole time it's watering, and then it's going to shut down. The head in the bottom is called a rotor head, and that's the kind of head usually in your larger turf areas. It's going to pop up, and it has a spray, and it goes around. It moves around in that half circle. So it's watering over here, and then it moves over here, and it goes back and forth. Now the nozzles on the left-hand side are called rotary nozzles. You may have heard the Rainbird has a brand of these. MP Rotator is the original rotary nozzles. Those are nozzles that spray out in fingers. I had a client one time call them the dancing nozzles because they're really kind of pretty to watch. But they retrofit to a spray head, the one at the top right, and they apply water in larger droplets, which are heavier, and so they're less prone to wind drift. And so if you have larger areas where you need to water, those are a good retrofit that can save water. They also apply water typically at a slower rate than a regular old spray head does. So you're slowing down that application of water. We're going to talk about why that's important here in a few minutes. So I've got my upgrade options listed here at the bottom left. Again, check valves. Check valves are like a little, kind of like a toilet flapper, but not exactly. They keep water from leaking out of the head when it's collapsed down in itself. So it retains water in the line to reduce that, that low drainage that you can have. Pressure regulation. Pressure regulated heads are a must. We don't use anything but these days because as city populations increase and cities need to supply more water to more people, they have to increase their mainline pressures to get water all the way over there now. So if you're anywhere from here to there, your mainline pressure is going to increase. As you push more water out of your irrigation emitters, it uses water exponentially. So if you go from a 30 pounds of pressure to a 60 pounds of pressure, you're not just going to use twice as much water. You might use 3 or 4 times as much water. It's an exponential increase. Not only that, but it's pushing water faster. The water drops are smaller. You've seen irrigation systems that look like mist, like gorillas could be coming through it at any moment. We call those gorilla in the mist systems. That is because the pressure is too high on that system. There's a couple of ways to adjust that pressure. Pressure regulated heads is one of them. I'm going to talk about another one in just a minute. Okay, I have a slide that is missing, so I'm going to go back to this slide. I don't know what happened to my other slide, but these valves, okay, so we're back to our hydraulic system. We've got our valves here. More likely than not, the valves that are in your residential system are what we call flow control valves. They're adjustable. They have a little turnstile at the top, kind of like a water spigot, and you can adjust those. The problem is most installation crews don't ever adjust those. So those valves go in at the manufacturer's default setting, which is typically as open as they can be. You may not need that much water in that particular zone. So you can adjust those flow controls down to reduce the amount of water that's coming out of those valves. And if your valves are older, more than likely you've been running max open all these years. You can adjust those down and it pushes that diaphragm down and it can really improve the performance of your sprinkler heads. And while we're reducing flow, which is not exactly the same thing as reducing pressure, both of those things do the same job. They're going to reduce the amount of water that's coming out of your emitters. So adjusting those zone valves is definitely an option. Be careful when you do this. If your valves are 20 years old or so, you could cause one to fail open because that diaphragm is so old and stuck in its ways when you start moving it around. So be prepared for that. But most valves also can be serviced. When you have an irrigation technician come out to your house for a repair and he says, oh, well, your valve's broke, I'm going to have to cut it out. Ask them if it can be serviced. Because most valves, you can take that top of the bonnet off, put a brand new diaphragm in there, put a brand new solenoid on there, and it's virtually like a new valve. Unless your valve is cracked on the body, typically it can be serviced. There's a few brands that aren't serviceable, but most of the time they can be serviced. So that's another way for you to reduce the pressure overall, zone by zone on your system. Another thing to think about. Now, back to those systems that weren't installed before 2009. If you don't have a master valve, I really want you to think about getting one. And when you put a master valve in, it goes on your main line, right after that green box, after your backflow prevention device. And what the master valve does is kind of what it's named. It's the master of all valves. When your system needs to run, that master valve comes on first, and then your zone valve comes on. Then when everything is done watering, the master valve shuts off, so there's not water to the rest of those solid pipes, not flowing into those solid pipes when your system's not running. That means if one of those valves that you service gets stuck on and it wants to run all night, and oh gosh, you just went out of town for the weekend, that master valve is going to keep your water bill from killing you and just letting that water run all weekend, okay? Yeah, that valve is still going to stick on when something comes on in your system, but you're not going to waste water the whole time because that master valve is going to kill the water to the rest of your system. This part of your system right here at the very beginning, post-source, post-backflow, is also where you can put a pressure regulator on your whole system. That is typically adjustable. You install it on your main line, and you can turn down the pressure feeding your entire system. Now remember, the benefits of pressure regulation, your emitters are going to perform in the range that the manufacturer intends. So your performance is going to be more efficient. It's going to be more uniform. Your drops of water are going to be bigger and fatter and heavier and less prone to wind drift. You're going to eliminate that mist, okay? So those are three things to think about on your main line that can help you reduce water in your system. So we'll go back to where I was. Somehow my valve. So now I'm going to preach to the choir. So proper planting makes all the difference in your ability to water efficiently. You've heard this already in the three sermons before mine. Picking the right plant for the right place and putting the right plant in the ground properly. Your plant choices are so important. And this is something that I think is left out a lot of methodologies and philosophies for irrigators. Irrigators show up and go, what do you need to water? I'll throw water on it. And unfortunately, in the day and age that we're living in now, that's not a healthy proposition for them in the longevity of their career, or for you in the efficiency of your system. So I would urge you, if you work with an irrigation professional, ask them what they know about plants, ask them questions about the plants in your garden, and if you get a vibe that they don't really care, they're just going to throw water on whatever you want, you might want to keep looking for a more water-conscious irrigator. We're out there, but there's a lot of old dogs that don't care, and if you just need a head replaced, then fine, call that guy. But if you're really looking to make substantive changes to make your system more efficient and more uniform, you're going to want to get the right professional for the job. And soil prep, we've covered so much today. Soil is so important. With these rocky soils have a similar intake rate to most of the systems that I've been working on for 20 years, the heavy clay soils of North Texas. So we're going to talk about application rate here in just a few minutes. And then mulch. I'm an irrigator, and I'm begging you to use mulch, because it is one of the most water-saving opportunities in your bedding areas, because it shades the root zones, it feeds the soil as it decomposes, and it's really going to reduce the amount of water that you need to put down for a plant, because it compresses and reduces that evaporation rate that's really going to affect the available water to your plant. So I don't make any money off mulch, but I certainly advocate for it. And just put my little note, avoid the crown of the plant. So many times I see a landscape crew come in and they pile mulch everywhere, and they put it right up here on the plant so they can't even breathe. And then the plants die and they wonder why. So my husband is militant about avoiding the crown of the plant. All right, so just like when you get ready to get in shape, your fitness trainer is going to tell you, you can't train off a bad diet. It doesn't matter how many miles you run or how many weights you lift. If you're eating crap, you're not gonna see an improvement in your health. The same is true about irrigation. You can't out-conserve a crappy plant pellet. If you're trying to keep azaleas alive in Kerrville, God bless you, it's not gonna happen. You can't conserve a crappy plant pellet. So that's why plant choice is so important. It's so important. Turf choice is so important because you cannot overcome it with the most effective, state-of-the-art, scientific sprinkler system if you're really just trying to prop up a false environment that really doesn't belong in this area. So I'm echoing the sermons from before and say pick your plants wisely, because I can't help you if you're not also looking for the best plant option for those locations. Not only what kind of plant, but what's your shade situation? I can't tell you how many people try to keep a full sun plant alive in the shade, and it doesn't matter how well I water it, it's not gonna thrive in those areas. So you really need to know your yard, and you really need to know what belongs where. So we're gonna talk really quickly about irrigation scheduling, and I'm happy to talk more after my session if you have questions about scheduling. But I try to make it really simple. It doesn't matter how efficient your uniform your system is. If you're using good scheduling, you can save water in your landscape. So I encourage you to get to know that scary gray box in your garage. There's probably 1,000 YouTube videos from nerdy irrigators showing you exactly how to do what you want to do on it, okay? My husband and I are certified water nerds, and he's on Reddit all the time. He's on YouTube all the time. There's so much material available to you on the internet. Go to YouTube and put your irrigation type, your brand and model in. I guarantee you there's videos that show you how to use it. And a lot of those controllers have really water-saving things that you can do that most people just don't know about. So I'm going to talk to you about the two equations that I want you to remember at the bottom. S equals S, P equals P. Pretty easy, right? All right. Now, this is a graphic that I borrowed, I think, from Rainbird, that shows how to properly hydrozone a landscape, and it just makes me giggle every time, because who does this? Unless you're starting from scratch and doing your own, most systems don't have all your low water plants over here, so you can water them just a little bit, and all your high water plants over here just a little bit. So it's really hard to hydrozone when your plantings have not planned for you to hydrozone. So hydrozoning is a great theory if you have control of your entire landscape from the beginning, or you're converting it. But if you're like 90% of the rest of us, we inherited the landscape we got when we moved in, and we have to make do. So P equals P. In scheduling your irrigation controller, programs are for plants. The different kinds of plants that you need to water need to go on a similar program, okay? So most irrigation controllers have at least four programs. So I typically will set up a program for the turf areas, a program for high water annual color areas, a program for shrubs or trees. So you want to set up your different kinds of plants that have the similar water need on the same program. And it's not as difficult as you think. If you are relatively hydrozoned. If you're not, I'm going to talk to you about some middle of the road solutions that you can do in the meantime while you're transitioning to all natives. Programs typically determine how many days a week you're watering. Now, you may be limited in that because of your water restrictions, but the programs are still going to determine that. And your water days and times need to match your needs of your plant. Your zone run times are how many minutes of water you apply at a time. Obviously, it depends on what kind of plants you have. S equals S. Start times are for soils. Most irrigation controllers have at least 3 to 8 start times. When you're programming a start time, you are telling your controller what to do at each start time. You set up your run times. Let's, for this example, say they're all 5 minutes. Now we're going to tell how many 5 minutes do I want you to put on. That's how many start times I'm going to put on, okay? So if you want it to water 15 minutes total, I've got a 5-minute run time, you're going to want 3 start times, okay? That the system is going to do whatever you've programmed in your run times, it's going to do that at every start time, okay? So don't water it for 15 minutes thinking it's going to break it out. It's going to do 15 minutes every time if you put 15 minutes. So you want to do a lower run time and more start times, and I'm going to talk to you about why in just a minute. So utilizing multiple start times creates the deep watering that everybody talks about. It's really annoying to me when gurus go on TV or the radio and go, water your lawn infrequently and deeply, but they don't really explain how to do that. So people flood it. They get a lot of runoff, which is money down the drain, and then their turf still looks kind of So start times is how you can simulate that deep watering, but not run into a runoff situation. So I think of it as kind of like flights of soldiers. Your first start time is going to break that hydrophobic barrier that's on the surface of your soil that has granulated there since the last time you watered. I think it was our first speaker talking about salts that accumulate when you're using certain kinds of water in your yard, and all water is going to do that to some degree. So your first start time is going to break that hydrophobic barrier. That's your first 5 minutes of water. Then your second 5 minutes of water is going to follow those pathways that first 5 minute created and push water deeper. It's going to be able to go farther. Then your third start time is going to push all that even deeper. So you're watering deeper and you're not having runoff because you're spreading those out among your start times. So my advice is to don't put your start times so far apart that you're just recreating that salt layer. If you're watering once in the morning and once in the afternoon, you're having to break that hydrophobic barrier twice. Whereas if you water twice in the morning, maybe twice in the afternoon, you can probably water fewer total minutes, but you're going to get more effective water to your plant. We've looked at a few soil infiltration things today already, so I'd like to use this one, and it's really important when we start talking about drip, which I'm going to fly through. I know my time is almost up, but I do want to talk to you guys about drip because it gets a bad rap, and it gets a bad rap because it's used incorrectly, installed incorrectly, or maintained incorrectly. So none of that is the drip's fault, y'all. It's your fault. So I'm telling you, give drip a chance. That's all I'm saying. Give drip a chance. So drip is a great fit on areas where you've got overspray on your hardscapes or your windows. If you're surrounded by hardscape, like your parkway strip. New beds, where landscape is grown so tall that you've got deflection everywhere. Your spray heads pop up and spray one plant because it can't reach anything else. New beds, absolutely put drip in new beds. If you have the opportunity to start from scratch, drip is going to be your most conservative option. And also, if you're transitioning from a regular landscape to a native landscape, drip can be a good middle-of-the-road solution to add a little extra water in the places where you haven't yet retro to native, but it's still in the same zone. You can't afford to make 2 whole sprinkler zones, but you need to water these guys small and water these guys a little more. By putting micro emitters on your native plants and keeping your regular sprays on your other plants, now the Irrigation Bible is not going to tell you to do that. But it's a good middle-of-the-road solution to deliver a little water over here in the same number of minutes as you're delivering more water on the other side. So that's a good transition. Here's a little drip diagram for you guys. It's really important that your drip get a filter on your drip zone. Most drip kits that you can buy in stores will already incorporate this, but if you have an irrigation professional come out and put drip or retro a zone to drip, be sure and make sure that they're putting a filtration system on there. Okay, I've got a few more slides, but I'm running out of time. So I just want to end. I'm okay. Okay. So don't be ashamed of your grow-in period. Okay, especially if you're using native plants. The reputation of native plants everywhere is residing on the success of your bed. So set it up for success with a good, healthy grow-in period, and don't feel guilty about it. You're gonna have to water that plant the first year, maybe into the second year, and that third year, you know what happens. That's when the magic happens for native plants. They look amazing, and then everybody's asking you what you did, and they think you did it overnight, but really you've set it up with a good grow-in 3 years ago, and weaned it off as it got mature and grew out its roots. So a properly managed grow-in sets your plants up for success. Some of your irrigation controllers will even let you program a grow-in. Say, hey, do this special schedule for 14 days and then go back to your regular schedule. So check your YouTube videos and see if your irrigation controller can do that. Or another easy option is set up that schedule for the grow-in and then just stick a little reminder on your phone for 14 days from now to remind you to go back and check those. Now you guys, again, I'm preaching to the choir here because you guys are probably out in your gardens all the time, every day, checking everything and obsessing about it, and that's wonderful. But Joe Schmo next door to you probably hasn't the slightest idea what a grow-in is. So you can help spread the word and talk about a healthy grow-in. And you know that setting up a plant for success early in life is going to increase the likelihood that you can turn that irrigation off after year 3 or year 2. So don't feel bad about utilizing your irrigation system when you need it, knowing with the knowledge that you're going to cut it back as soon as it's possible. Okay, let me go. So, if all this is overwhelming to you, reach out to a Texas licensed irrigator, especially one that has a CLIA certification from the Irrigation Association or from Texas A&M. They both offer good auditing classes and certifications. You don't necessarily have to get a full-on audit to benefit from the knowledge of an irrigator who's knowledgeable about water audits. So if you're interested in doing it, but you just don't think you can take it on yourself, I urge you to reach out and interview that irrigation professional and find the right one that's really going to let your needs determine his goals and not vice versa. So it's really our privilege to be a part of the water saving solution on this earth. Thankfully, we're not all sitting here in this room determining how we can provide water for our children to drink. We're talking about how we can keep our landscapes alive. So it's really our privilege to be a part of this solution, especially in the Texas Hill Country. We know that we're depleting our groundwater resources. I think the last thing I heard is 6 times the rate of recharge. So you guys, that's not sustainable. And someday, somebody with enough clout is going to look around and go, hey, we're pouring drinkable water on St. Augustine grass, guys. Why are we doing that? And everything's going to radically change. But until that time, all we can do is spread the word, talk about conservation efforts, and remember that only you and probably your spouse are sick of your lines. Everyone else hasn't heard them before. So don't be afraid to talk to somebody, to ask your neighbor or talk to someone that's maybe an acquaintance to about possibly changing. If everybody makes a small change, then those can add up to big differences. If you have any questions, this is my personal email address. I'd be happy to answer those or help you guys out in any way. I know I talked 30% faster, but I hope that you took away some nuggets of knowledge and information, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Your mantra about mulch, overhead watering of layers of mulch, if it doesn't get down to the roots, is no good. So I'm assuming you're talking about mulching below or watering below the mulch.
Yeah, mulch is absolutely necessary if you're doing drip because drip line itself is not UV resistant. So it's gotta be buried, right? You don't really, I mean, you can bury it in soil, but definitely bury it under mulch. If you're overhead watering in bedding areas, you wanna be sure that your run times are enough to saturate down into the soil level. You don't wanna create a fungal situation in too much mulch and not enough deep water.
Recommendation of depth?
We typically recommend 3 inches of twice shredded hardwood mulch because your lawn guy's gonna blow away at least an inch eventually, if not the first time. So we typically say 3 inches, that'll leave you with 2 inches through most of the year.
That's fun. Well,
Okay.
thank you very
Great,
much,
thank you.
Amanda. That was really wonderful.